Hello, and welcome to Chucked and Blessed, where the weird gets wonderful and the woo-woo gets real. I'm your host, Charles Crooks, psychic, teacher, and guide on this deep dive into grounded spirituality. Let's keep it honest, curious, and connected. Here we go. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the second episode of Chucked and Blessed. So for this one, I thought we would continue kind of my foundationals of how I see things and how I do things. And for this episode, we are going to focus on readings, as readings are pretty much the psychic's kind of main way of, of sharing their gifts or kind of being able to share their capabilities with someone. So I thought it was the perfect opportunity to kind of really look at the reading, see what it is, where it comes from, how it works, and all that fun stuff. As I would say, a lot of the times one of the biggest questions people will ask me are, how do readings work? So we're definitely going to look into all of that. All right, so let's just jump right in with a general brief history of readings as they go back very far. So I am no historian. I am literally just going to take collected information from Wikipedia here. So I am sorry if it is incorrect. By all means, please reach out if you do know if there is something inaccurate, and I'm happy to fix that. So here we go, starting with a very brief history. So readings themselves have been around since ancient times, particularly since prehistoric and tribal societies, where you would find shamans and oracles within those societies. Shamans often acted as intermediaries between the spirit world and humans, providing guidance, healing, and prophecy through trance states, dreams, and rituals. There was also clay tablets from this era of ancient Mesopotamia, approximately 3000 BCE, that describe systematic dream interpretation and omens. It is also believed that systems like astrology and the reading of animal entrails were common during this time. And so then even through ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and Rome, we see all sorts of records of astrology as well as readings, including like the Oracle of Delphi, very famous from ancient Greece. One of the most famous ancient psychics who would deliver cryptic messages from Apollo while in a trance. And I do believe that is said that she would also get high off of the fumes coming from the volcano. And that's kind of what induced this trance-like state. And then you even have, from ancient China to India, you have the I Ching, which means books of changes, a Chinese divination text. And in India, you had the Vedic seers, or rishis, that had all sorts of spiritual practice, including palmistry and other forms of astrology. You had the rise of tarot in the 15th century in medieval Europe, and things continued into the Renaissance and beyond. But it's really looking at modern history that the 1850s to early 1900s, we really saw a big jump in spirituality and spiritualism in Western society, particularly in America and Western Europe. And so very common for the time was hiring a medium for a seance, and you would gather everyone together, and then that medium would then be the conduit to the other side. But if you've been on any of my ghost tours, you definitely know that a lot of times that people were employing fake tactics to make them think that they were communicating with the other side, when really you just had a lot of people being fake, which is nothing new to history. You find that throughout history and even still common today. And so obviously when it comes to looking at the history of the world and readings, I skipped a lot, but the whole point is to basically understand is that they've been around for a very long time, and that it really does seem that they are a very common and persistent part of human culture. And so next up, I thought I would share a little bit about my history with readings and how I kind of came into them. And so I know that I had probably had about maybe 2, 3 tarot readings before. I think like maybe one at a Ren Fair, one another. I went with a friend that I was working with in high school to go see a psychic in downtown Cleveland. And honestly, I barely remember anything about either of the readings that I had. But I think that most of the time when I was looking for that guidance, I either wanted validation for where I was or some sort of hope and guidance for what was to come next. And so even though I don't necessarily use future reading as how I read now, I very much acknowledge that for a lot of people that's how they do get into readings to start with. I think we all have a very natural curiosity to know what is going to happen with our future, because the uncertain does make us uncomfortable. And so to have that kind of reading be the voice of something that gives you direction, or to kind of be that reassurance, I think there's a lot of power in that. And so a lot of people do seek readings for that validation and for that comfort to know what is to come. Or even if we don't know what exactly is to come, I still think having that kind of future foresight still gives a bit of comfort as we go into things, so we can't really be caught off guard or maybe not so surprised if that thing does show up. So as I mentioned in the first episode, I initially got into tarot after watching Charmed, where there is an episode where one of the sisters gave a reading to another, and I just thought to myself, I could do that. And so I exactly did. So I went and bought myself my first deck. It was just the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, very common, very traditional imagery that you've probably seen in TV and movies today. And got the Idiot's Guide to Tarot, and I said, here we go. So of course, probably first 4 years, I was relying on the book that came with the deck, and really just kind of feeling my way through things. I started to learn very, very basic meanings of cards, but really didn't have any intention of getting really into it. But over the years, it was one of those hobbies that never really went away. My tarot practice really began to deepen after I moved to Bellingham, where I joined a local meetup group for tarot that would meet once a month. And from there, we did all sorts of activities with each other, and it just gave me the insight to not only trust myself when it came to reading, that I was able to pull out more information than just the book and kind of really find my own interpretations of things, but it also really just gave me the confidence to get to know a tarot deck, because if you're unfamiliar with tarot, there are 78 different cards, and every single card is different. So you have the major cards, you have the minor cards. The major cards are more about your big lessons or themes of energy going on, where your minor cards are very reflective to the day-to-day things that we encounter, or the personalities of other people and ourselves. And so being in this group, it gave me the confidence to start reading professionally out and about in the world. And I first started to read for the Good Time Girls tours here in Bellingham. And the Good Time Girls were founded by Sarah Holodnik and Marissa McGrath, and they do deep dives into history of Bellingham and are very well researched. And during their Halloween season, they would kind of offer a more spooky tour. So at the end, I would then be like kind of an add-on tarot option that people could do. And so having that practice was not only kind of unnerving because it showed me where I needed to become better as a reader, but it also gave me the experience of just having the practice of reading over and over and over, and which I've said before, that is invaluable. As a reader, you really get to learn not only your own style, but how you connect with your own intuition simply by the art of practicing. So when it comes to learning readings, practicing is one of the greatest things that you can do to really hone your skills in your craft. But when I first started the tarot, or at least to try to read with the tarot, I very much wanted to believe that all of that information that I was kind of pulling from out of nowhere, I wanted to believe that it was coming from a source outside of myself. And I very much, I think, found the value in tarot and in readings for that advice specifically because I really wanted to be told from either God or from a higher perspective or my higher self or angels, whatever it is. I wanted to be told what to do, or I wanted to be given that outside validation that I was at least on the right path and I could figure it out from there. But I never really wanted to accept the personal responsibility that maybe these readings were actually coming from me instead of some outside source. Now, I say that because I firmly believe that readings are reflections. And it took me a long time to really understand this and what this meant. But I really saw this play in action throughout my early tarot readings that I would always do for myself. And what I would notice is that when I was in a good mood, my reading would often reflect that with good cards. Or on the reverse, if I was in a bad mental space or bad emotional space, then that would often be reflected in the reading as that I had a lot of work to do or that I was navigating a lot of challenge. And so at first, I kind of noticed the correlation, but I didn't really want to believe that it was just coming from me because, like I said, I really wanted to believe that this was coming from something bigger or from something outside of myself. I wanted that divine confirmation that there was something else out there telling me what to do. But then it was really when I got into my clairvoyance training with Jill Miller here in Bellingham. And like I said, unfortunately, she doesn't offer classes anymore here in town. But one of the very first things that she taught us in her classes was that readings were reflections. And I'll never forget, I was lying in bed one morning and it just kind of hit me. And it's like one of those things where you could hear it a million times, but for some reason that one time it just sinks in a little bit deeper and actually seems to make sense. For some reason this time while I was lying in my bed, it all seemed to come together. And I really accepted the fact that maybe these readings were a literal reflection of what was coming from inside of me. And as I would do tarot readings for the tours, this was one thing that people that I did the reading for picked up on quite a bit. As we would go through the cards and kind of tell them what's going on with them right now, they would often say, well, I know all that, and that's what's happening right now, but I want to know what's to come next. And so very much, I think that's where that kind of future element came in. But I really find that there's a lot of reassurance and kind of having someone tell you, no, this is what you're going through, and here's maybe another way to think about it. And so when it comes to actually telling the future, is it possible that you can? Yes, and I think that there are people out there that are potentially skilled at doing so. But you got to keep in mind, too, that when you share a potential of a future with someone, typically that person will tend to hold on to that future vision, whether it's good or bad. And then just by holding on to it on an energetic level, they might manifest that reality to come true. So then at that point, are you really future foretelling, or are you really just kind of planting that future seed in someone so that they can grow that themselves? And so I think there's nothing wrong with potentially giving someone like directions towards a future outcome. But I just think that when it comes to actually predicting the future, one, you can't very easily because of free will. And that is really what kind of really changes all the potentials of future, because your free will can absolutely take something in a completely different direction. And so with that, I really like to keep my readings focused in on the present, because when you think about it, really the present moment is all we have. We often tend to throw our energy always in the past or the future, but how often are we really just being present in the moment with ourselves and our energy? And so that is where I really find readings to be powerful, because they help you navigate the present moment more so than the past or the future. And I think, too, it's worth mentioning that on an energetic note, when it comes to always throwing yourself in the past or the future, energy wise, you're really kind of spreading yourself out thin. And when you are in the present moment, I kind of see it as like a vacuum that it kind of sucks that energy back up into you and can be very, very beneficial to kind of call that energy back into your space. Alrighty, so for this next part of the episode, I thought I would share with you guys some of the most frequently asked questions that I get about being psychic at the end of the ghost tours. So after I finish both tours, I usually allow some time for people to either share their own experiences or to ask about mine. And it's really led to some really interesting conversations. But one of the things that people are most curious about are what it's like to be psychic and what that experience kind of looks like. So first up, number one I've got is, how do readings work? Okay, so I believe that there's 3 clear components that you need in order for a good reading to happen. So number one, this mostly is on the reader. You have to set a very clear intention. So it's possible to read without a clear intention, but really you're kind of saying to the universe, to energy, this is where you want to go and where you want to direct things. And without that, things can be very wishy-washy or can be very hard to interpret. So, and I think too, as the readee, the person getting the reading or asking the questions, that you can have a little bit more of a vague stance, because sometimes you might just be in confusion. And so you might not necessarily have that very clear direction in what you even want to try to ask, and I think that's totally okay. But as a reader, you have to go in with a very set, clear intention with everything that you're going to read. So then number 2, something that we've already talked about, is understanding that reading is reflection. So when I read, I essentially see that everything that I am experiencing within that person relates to their present in some way, shape, or form. Now, for example, you could see a past life where you might talk to guides, or you might see a block in the chakras. Any of those might relate to a past or future thing, but I still want to connect that to how it affects the present. So very much that's where I see that element of reflection, because really that's the energy that's being affected. It's the energy of right now. And then number 3, really I feel like this is on the reader and the readee, but a lot more on the readee in this case, is that you have to have a sense of openness. And if you can have a sense of even just curiosity, really that's good for both. But it really helps the energy flow so much easier, especially for the reader. I have found that when I have connection with someone, even if I don't know them, if I've never met them, but even if we just have a very pleasant experience in how we kind of go into that reading together, I often find that, again, that being even very reflective to itself, that I have a good reading. It's when you find people that are not open, that they're possibly afraid as to what might come up, and not saying that fear is a bad thing, because everyone's going to have some element of it. But I think if it's dominating the reading energy, or kind of that reading space, then it can be difficult to navigate through, because that can be so heavy, and even kind of hard for the reader to kind of navigate through and kind of have to dig through. I always kind of see a lot of fear as like really, really heavy mud, and sometimes that can be moved away, but sometimes it can be really hard and dry and cake-like as well, and that can kind of make it hard to navigate through the reading. So just by having an openness to each other, just by having kind of a willingness and curiosity to go into this reading with each other really, really helps things. And a hard lesson for me to learn was to say no to people that were not really into receiving a reading, or were coming in with a prove-it attitude. I really find that within my reading skills that I have nothing to prove to anyone, and that when it's a shared experience, it can be a very powerful and cool experience for both people to have. But when one party is coming from either they don't want to engage in that, or if they're coming with a kind of, like I said, prove attitude, that really kind of stops the energy and makes it really hard for the reader to even connect with the readee at all. And I find too, especially when I would read at big events, you would see a lot where you might give a reading for one person that goes really well, and then they want to have their partner have that same kind of experience, but the partner is not into getting the reading at all. And so if I experience that, I just simply say, you know what? We're not going to proceed with this, even though I know that you had a powerful experience, does not mean that it is going to be for everyone. So if you have people in your lives that are not into it, please do not force them into a reading, because that is not fun for anyone, the reader or the readee, even though they might have the potential that it could come out good. But it's really something the best to let people approach on their own. But to wrap this one up and summarize one last time, to make a reading work, you need clear intention, to understand the reflection, and openness, I would say, are the three key components to making a reading happen. Okay, on to the next question. Let's see. Question number 2. Ooh, how do you know you're not just making this stuff up? This is a really good question, actually, and something that I would ask myself, and even my classmates would ask ourselves in the clairvoyance training that we went through. So when it comes to reading with tarot, I kind of see that as almost like reading with training wheels, because you have the image literally right in front of you, but it's up to you to interpret it. When it comes to clairvoyance, you are letting your mind kind of have these images come up on their own without trying to create them in your own imagination. And so I think that causes a lot of confusion and kind of inner turmoil a little bit as to figure out, well, is this me having a psychic moment, or am I just making this up completely? And I think it even becomes a little bit harder too, because as I got into more advanced reading, there's even different elements of being able to see things clearly in my mind versus having things that you just know come to you. And so you start to, well, I guess I would say you start to, with practice, start to unravel these different levels of nuancy that you get to know. And that's really how you kind of know that you're not making this up. So again, with tarot, I have the image right there in front of me. So all I really have to do then is interpret this to the situation and figure out how that connects. But what I realized from my clairvoyance training, that when I would do tarot readings, I was still connecting into a space that kind of went beyond myself. So I wasn't just interpreting the card from the images or from the knowledge that I had of those images, but I would kind of go beyond. And it took me a long time to understand that I was even doing this, but I would recognize it when people would say, like, well, could you repeat what you just said? And I would have no idea or even recollection of what literally just came out of my mouth. And so I realized that I was in this completely different space of getting into this information or getting into how I kind of perceive things and how that would come through me. So I had to even be aware of the different levels of awareness that were going on without me being aware of it at the time. And this is why it is so important to make your reading practice an actual practice, to gain as much experience actually doing the thing, because that is where you're really going to learn all those different little nuances of, am I creating this or not? And so after being in the clairvoyance training, I really just kind of understood that there was this feeling of when I created images in my mind of versus when I would take a step back in my being and let things just appear. And so that is really where that reading space is for me. It's kind of a space of allowing. It's a space of getting out of my own way of trying to make things happen. And I just see whatever comes up, and I just kind of roll with it. Now, there are a lot of times where I will be reading clairvoyantly, and sometimes whatever comes up first, I'll completely wipe out, clear out, just because I think that there is an influence of my mind in that first image. And sometimes you just can't help that. Your mind wants to come up with what you just asked about. And so I'll often wipe that away and try to settle in a little bit deeper and ask again. And then I usually find the more significant images or symbols come up behind that. But for me, that's just a very personal practice, and not everyone's going to be that same way. But I at least found that beneficial to kind of say, all right, I'm going to acknowledge that my mind is a part of this on that first image, kind of wipe it away, and then try again for that deeper, more energetic image to come through. And so the more I read and the more I practiced, the more I really started to learn these very gentle nuances that were within me. Like, for example, if I feel someone's guides coming through in a reading, doesn't matter if I'm reading clairvoyantly or with tarot, or even doing both, I will feel kind of like a voice inside my head come from the upper right. And I found that not always, but that is generally where people's guides will come from. And it's just how I experience it. And sometimes if I call in other people's guides intentionally, I might see them in front of me or a little bit more towards the left versus when I just sort of hear them in my space. And there's all sorts of different nuances of, let's say, maybe feeling angel energy versus guide energy, feeling past life energy versus present energy. You start to learn the nuances of someone else's energy versus their own energy. And so all of these different little aspects of reading, you start to become more and more aware of. But again, it only comes with practice. And that is one of the things that I am forever grateful for the program that I went through at Simply Spirit, because we had so much reading practice built into the program itself. We were constantly reading each other in the class as our activities. We even had a joint class once a month with all the other classes that would get together. So we got to read other people that were doing the same thing at different levels of study, which was always very cool. And then we even had to do student-led readings for the public. And that was always good because it really made you test your skills in a safe space. It really helped to have the readee coming in knowing that you were working on what you were doing and that it wasn't going to be a perfect experience. And I think just kind of having that safety net made it a very safe environment and a very encouraging environment to be able to learn how to read. So I am forever grateful for all of that time that I got, because I highly doubt I would be as confident in my skills if it were not for those courses. All right, and last up, we've got question number 3, and a lot of people want to know, how did I know that I could do this? Or was there an experience particularly that made me feel like, you know what, there is something to this and I can do it? And yes, there absolutely is. So I had just signed up for my very first clairvoyance class at Simply Spirit. And we had gone through the whole class, the whole first initial class, and we really didn't get into reading much for ourselves or for each other. And I totally expected that, and I figured we'd jump in next class. But I was still super curious about it. And one of the symbols that we were going to learn to use for reading was a rose. And so our teacher used this technique a lot of teaching the rose as a reading symbol. And we didn't get anything into it, but I was kind of curious. And I was like, well, with things wrapping up, I'm just going to try it on my own. And so I was like, well, let's just see what would happen if I ask for a rose or see a rose for the person sitting next to me and be like, let's just see what comes up. And I did not see a rose. But what I did see was a bunch of leaves from the rose stem that were torn off of the stem, leaves only, that were swirling around in this tornado-like column. And so they just kept spinning and spinning and spinning. It was just like leaves in this air. And so I was like, well, whatever. I'm going to completely forget this. That didn't work out. And so I just let it go and moved on. So then it was weeks later, I think it was even the end of the class, after this 8-week class. It was our graduating class, and we're all sharing about our experiences and our time there. And the woman that was sitting next to me in that very first class, who I asked to see a rose for, she said that she initially tried the exact same thing that I did, but she asked to see a rose for herself, and she saw this rose, but it was spinning around and around and around and around, and she had no idea what it meant. So she just kind of left it and said, well, maybe this isn't for me, or maybe I'm not going to be good at it. And so I just thought it was really coincidental that I happened to see the spinning leaves, and she saw the spinning rose for herself. And it was really just enough of a small moment to make me believe and think, I've got this and I can do this. It is definitely one of those little moments for sure that I often go back to in my own mind when I kind of lose my own way, or I think, am I really experiencing what I am experiencing? And it's just a little helper to be like, yes, you are. You've had the validation from the past. So let go of any of the doubts or the fears and just keep rolling with what you know and what you're doing. And so I do. And as I start to wrap up this episode, there's one more point that I would like to bring up, and that is really that readings are just information. I think sometimes we might try to lean in a little bit too much to them, especially when we don't really know how to own finding that direction for ourselves. And that's okay, but at some point we still have to recognize that taking action is up to us only. And it is great to have that outside perspective and to have that kind of outside direction or a different way to think about things. But in the end, we always have to make our own choices and have to just roll with that. Because again, that's kind of what life is. And like I talked about in the first episode, that life is meant to be experienced. And if we're constantly looking for outside forces, whether it's people, spiritual forces, or whatever, to kind of direct that for us, then we've really kind of lost our own way in being the director, main character of our own lives. So just keep that in mind. So if you do go into a reading with anyone, myself included, I always say take it with a grain of salt, because really it is just another perspective to help you along your path. So you can always take what resonates for you in a reading and leave behind what doesn't, but it's ultimately up to you to make the decisions and actions for your own life. And that, my friends, is all I've got for today. Join me next week to wrap up the last of the foundational series as I talk about manifesting your own life. I cannot thank you enough for being here and being open. You can visit charlescrooks.com or email me directly at info@charlescrooks.com to book a reading. You can also find me on Instagram at Charles R. Crooks. You do need that little middle initial R in there for that one, or on TikTok at Chucked and Blessed. May you forever be chucked and blessed, and always go into this world with clear eyes and an open butt. Until next time, my friends, stay curious.